Hi everyone, it's Keren here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a new tutorial where I am experimenting with the new Shrink Prink from Dress My Craft. And here I'm going to show you which one it is. I was lucky to get this at Creativation so I could experiment and play around with it. But now it's available for sale and I will link that below in the description area so you guys can purchase it if you like what I do. And I'm actually going to test it with so many different mediums because I figure if I'm already doing a video, I might as well do something that really helps you determine what's your favorite medium to use, because that will determine whether or not you want to purchase this, because it's much easier when you have somebody doing the experiments for you, and that way you can decide whether or not you want to buy something. So stay tuned. This might be a little bit of a longer video, and I really hope that you stayed through because truly you don't want to miss all the different experiments that I do with the different mediums. And I really used a lot of mediums. I used almost 12 or 13 mediums, and some of them are doubled up because I was testing different things. So I really recommend you staying till the end to watch this. And if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. And also if you want to be notified whenever I upload a video, go ahead and press the little bell beside my name, and that will notify you every time I upload a video, and that way you don't have to always check to see when I have a new video. So let's get started. So the Shrink Prink is a shrinking film that has one smooth side and one frosted side, which is a little bit rough. So the nice thing about it is that you can use both sides and it shrinks to a minimum small size, and you can do so many things with it. So things like alcohol inks or alcohol pens or anything that goes on a smooth, non-porous surface would be using I would be using the smooth side, while the things like watercolors or pastels or anything that you color it with and that you want it to absorb, you would be using the porous side, which is the frosted or rough side. So there's a couple tools that I'll be using in the video as well. So there is this silicone tweezers that are really great because that way you don't get burnt when you're holding things, because you can easily get burnt. And then there's this bone folder that you can actually hold things as well. It's made out of non-heating materials, so it's great for that as well. And it's similar to this one. And both of these, all three of these are available on sale, and I'll link those links below. You can see one of the examples that was made at Creativation by in the Dress My Craft booth, and they actually created lines on this and everything and put a diamond in it. So you're going to see all the examples that I make, and then you can see this one as well, which turned out beautiful, and they made some really beautiful jewelry with it. The first way I wanted to experiment with is using some alcohol markers. You can use any type of alcohol markers such as Copics, Spectrum Noir, or Altenew. And all I did is started coloring my die cut with the marker, with the lightest marker. So I covered everything with the lightest marker as if I was coloring paper. And then I took the next shade and colored the center out, so that way I would get two shades. This die cut is the butterfly from Holtz. And they come two in a set, so I die cut a few of them so I could use them for the different mediums. Then I took the third color and I blended it in the center. Once I did that, I blended all three colors together until I was happy with the way they were blended. Just to point out that when you're using alcohol markers, it's really important to use the smooth part of the shrink film, just because it blends better. You can probably use the other side as well, but I find it too rough to use. Once I finished blending everything, I took a script stamp, and using some black archival ink, I decided to create some stamp images on the butterfly. The reason why I used archival ink is because it's alcohol based, and I knew it would stamp really well on the plastic film. You can also use StazOn or any ink that goes well on plastic. Once I finished stamping, I took my heat tool and I started melting the plastic and shrinking it. It's best to use a diffuser heat tool like the one from Ranger and not one that is embossing, because the one that embosses, the heat is too concentrated and it's too hard and it melts too fast. I also use these tweezers from Dress My Craft because they have silicone tips, and that way you're not burning your finger when you're holding the plastic. You need to hold it and turn it around, otherwise it flies away. So it's really important to have some kind of good tweezers. And I'm going to be linking all those materials below in the description area. You have to let the shrink film shrink all the way until it can shrink no more. And once it shrinks, it's a beautiful hard embellishment that you can use either for a card or a scrapbook or just to make a beautiful jewelry out of it. So it's really beautiful and it's perfect for any type of project. For the next experiment, I took another one of the butterfly die cuts and I used some alcohol inks. These are the Tim Holtz alcohol inks. And I just basically covered the smooth plasticky part of the film. I added 2 different colors just to make it interesting and then blended them together. I find this works better when using lighter colors because I did experiment with this beforehand. And I found that the darker colors were harder to see when you shrunk the paper, when you shrunk the film. So I decided to use these lighter colors. And I will show you the other ones at the end of this video. You'll be able to see the darker ones as well. I decided to add a little bit of a darker color in the center just to add a little bit more interest. But then I found it too dark, so I redid it by adding some of the lighter colors and taking some of the and dabbing some of the dark colors away. Then I took my heat tool again and started melting the butterfly to shrink it. Using my tweezers, I held it on one side until they melted on the one side, and then you turn it around and melt the other side. It's really important to let it melt all the way, even if it curls everywhere, because once it's fully melted, it takes its shape again. And while it's still hot, you can carefully shape wings or flowers, whatever you're making, you can carefully shape that as well. So it looks weird at the beginning and you're thinking that you're ruining it, but the piece always goes back into its original shape. If you try to reshape, let's say, the wings, and you're not happy with the way it turned out, all you have to do is heat it again, and it will heat the plastic, and you'll be able to reshape it back to whatever place you wanted the embellishment to be. So what's nice about it is because it's plastic, you can shape it and reshape it as many times as you want by heating it up again. The next one I wanted to experiment is with some chalk pastels. You can use artists' chalk pastels or pan pastels. These are very chalky, and I did the same thing. I colored in a die cut. This is the Tattered Flowers from Tim Holtz, the distressed ones. And I started with a light color. It's a peachy kind of color, just by covering the whole flower. And then I added some darker colors as well. So the first layer, it's really light, but then when you use the next colors, you can create shading. The next color I used was the orange, and I added it in the center and just blended it out so it would create that shaded darkness in the center. Now these chalk pastels, from all the mediums, they were the ones who took the longest to dry. They were permanent at the end, but I found that they still were chalky when I used to touch them with my finger, even after I heat set it, but eventually they set completely. The last color I added was the dark red just to add that third color and have it all blend together into a nice shaded flower. For the chalk pastels, I actually used the rougher side of the film instead of using the smooth one like I had used before with the alcohol mediums. Then I started the same procedure of melting the flour. These tweezers are really handy because you don't get burnt in your hand, because when the plastic burns, it's really hot and you end up burning your fingers. A few times I grabbed it before I was not supposed to, and my fingers got a little bit burnt. I mean, it doesn't really hurt, but you want to use tweezers or something that you can hold it in certain places. Now, if you want to create flowers for jewelry, then what you should do is first, before you melt it, you should hole punch the center or wherever you're going to hang it by. So if you're going to hang, let's say, it as a pendant, then you should make a little hole with like a crocodile or any type of hole puncher into the petal or in the center. That will help you put a string in it or some kind of wire so you can hang it around your neck. Or if you want to add like a pearl inside or some kind of pin, then you can do that as well. You can make a hole for a brad if you want to add one inside, or even an eyelet if you really feel like using eyelets, which I haven't used in ages. But what I like about it is that you can really customize the flower and layer it in any way you want. So you can melt a few flowers or petals together and then layer them one on top of the other to create a 3D flower. And then you can just add a pearl or a diamond in the middle. So it really helps to put the hole first, because you cannot make the hole after it shrinks because it's hard plastic and it will break. Another great tool that I found really helpful was this Dress My Craft pencil bone folder, because it really helped me hold things in place so I could heat set them. The next product I experimented with was Zig Real Brush Markers. These are the clean color real brush markers, and I just took 3 colors and blended it into the butterfly that I had die cut. I'm trying to use a white background underneath so that way you can really see how I'm coloring them in. First I started with the light purple, and then I went with the darker purple and then the magenta. In this case I used again the rough side of the film because I really wanted the color to be absorbed into the film. And this butterfly turned out really beautiful. You can also use a little bit of water to help the watercolor inside the markers blend together, but it's not necessary. I really wanted to test it to see if it would work, and then all I had to do was just dry it up. You can let this dry naturally and then shrink it, or it will just dry while you're shrinking it and it doesn't move. It is perfect that way. So I started heating it up again by holding it with the tweezers, and as I was melting the plastic, the watercolor of the markers dried as well. It's really so fun to see how it shrinks because it turns really weirdly shaped, and then suddenly it straightens up again and it looks perfect again. So I just really love the way it shrinks, and it's just so beautiful to look at the effect because it's a translucent effect. The next medium I wanted to try it with was Distress Oxide inks. Now I love Distress Oxide inks so much, and I'm sure this would work as well with Distress Oxide sprays. So because they have the same constitution, this would be the same thing. You could do it either with the sprays by just spraying 2 colors or inking the background. I just took 2 colors, the pink and the purple one, and I started blending on top of the die-cutted butterfly. You can either add 1 or 2 colors. You could probably use maybe a smaller dauber, but I just wanted 2 colors and that was it. Then I took my spray bottle and lightly splattered it with water. I put the spray on my hand first and just lightly drizzled it on top. I let the water sit there for a few seconds, and then I took a paper towel and just dabbed out the excess. I have to say that this was my favorite butterfly from all the experiments that I did. It doesn't look as great when it's in the big form, but when I shrunk it, it looked fantastic. You have to see what happens to this butterfly. I was so impressed. Once I got the hang of it, when I was melting and shrinking, it was so easy because I knew that I didn't have to worry that things would not go into place. They just did automatically. As long as I kept going, and the wings would open up again after shrinking. For the next medium, I figured that if I could use inks, then I can definitely use any type of art crayons. So I went and tested two different crayons. One was the gelatos, and the other one was the distressed crayons from Holtz. Now you can definitely use here Dina Wakley's crayons or Marabu crayons or the Prima oil pastels. Like any of those work because they're water soluble and they work perfectly with this mediums. And the same thing as the inks, you need to use the rougher side so that way it sticks to the background. So the distressed oxide inks were also done in the rough side of the film. Now I didn't realize when I was filming this that gelatos are not as highly available as other art crayons, so I am listing below different types of art crayons that you could use on this. So it doesn't have to be gelatos, but if you have those at home, then just test them and play around with them. They're really fun, and you can shade them in different ways. So I used again the Tattered flowers from Holtz, and I die cut two different ones. And one of the flowers I used gelatos, and the other one I used the distressed crayons, and just blended them both. Again, you can also spray it with a little bit of water and blend everything. I didn't do it for this one, and I added a much darker layer to the small flower than to the other one because I wanted to see how they would turn out. Then I again melted both flowers until they were fully shrunk. With flowers, what you can do is use something to hold it in the middle, so you're shrinking the petals from all different sides. Once both flowers were shrunk fully, I put one inside another and melted one into the other so they would stay together. As I said before, you can pre-punch a hole in each of the flowers so you can string them together or put a brad or a pin in between, and that would create a really nice pendant or brooch or even some kind of embellishment for a card or a scrapbook page or even a mixed media project. Basically, you can use this for anything. The next medium I tried it with is sprays. And this is why I meant before that any type of spray goes. So you want to make sure that the spray has some kind of fixative. So there are some, like I think the illusions don't have a fixative, so they're always move with water, or they're not permanent until they're heat set. But what I did here is that I used Prima's Color Bloom spray and some Holtz stains. The gold one is the Holtz one. You can also use Lindy's Gang or any other type of pigment spray, distressed oxide inks, anything goes. And I sprayed it again on one of the Tattered flowers. And as before, I just melted it while it was still wet because I figured that everything will just dry up while it melts. This flower turned out so beautiful, and it has blue and golden specks on it, and you'll be able to see a close-up of it at the end of this video. I really like the way it turned out. The next one is actually another one of my favorite pieces because it was made with my new light bulb foam stamp from Joggles. I took the black archival ink from Ranger and I stamped my foam stamp on a rectangular piece of shrink film. It's really hard to see it here, but I did stamp it on the background, and you can see here how nicely it turned out. Now I set this paper aside for a few minutes just to let the ink dry, because I wanted to make sure that it doesn't smudge. Since I cannot heat it that well, I prefer just letting it air dry because I didn't want to shrink the film. Then I took some scissors and I cut around the whole light bulb so I would have the exact shape around it. You can do this basically with any shaped stamp that you want, and you can cut around it. If you have the die cut to cut the stamp, then that's even easier because you don't even have to use your scissors for that. As you can see, the film die cuts really well. I decided to hole punch this light bulb at the top of it. You could also do it at the bottom. That way I could create either a keychain or hang it off something with a string. But you must, as I said, hole punch it before you shrink it. Otherwise, you can't hole punch it afterwards because the plastic is too hard. To color this embellishment, I used some watercolors. Now, of course, for any of these examples that I've done now, you can use any type of medium. It doesn't matter which one you use. You can use the watercolors, the distressed oxide inks, the alcohol inks. Any of the examples can be interchanged, but I just wanted to show you as many possibilities as possible. I'm using the watercolors and I'm blending them with a brush and a little bit of water. I definitely wanted to use some lighter colors like the yellows and the oranges because I did attempt to do this beforehand with some darker colors, and you could not see the writing or the details of the light bulb once the darker colors kind of blended together with them. So using lighter colors really helps to make the embellishment stand out. I slightly dried the background because I wanted to add a little bit of shimmer onto the painted area. So I heat set it very quickly because I didn't want the shrink film to melt. And then I took a glitter pen and basically just added a little bit of shimmer to the watercolor. The reason why I had to dry it in advance is because otherwise the shimmer would blend with the watercolors and stain everything. Then I quickly shrunk the light bulb with the heat tool and just continued shrinking it until it wouldn't shrink anymore. And again, this turned out to be one of my favorite pieces as well because I just love the way it turned out, and it's also dear to my heart because it's one of my own stamp designs. Here is the final product, and it's so shimmery and nice. And here's the other one that I mentioned before that I did with alcohol inks, but they were too dark so you can barely see the create word underneath. It's still a beautiful embellishment, but I prefer using the lighter colors for these. For the next one, I die cut one of the hearts. I think it's a Spellbinder's die. You can barely see it because it's transparent, but you will in a second once I add the ink. And I decided to just color it in with a little bit of archival ink. For this experiment, I didn't care which ink I was using. I could have gone back with the distress inks or distress oxide inks, but this one is the one I had at hand. So what was my intention is to try to use it with a stencil. So all I did is just basically ink the background. Once I finished inking the background, I took a stencil. I think this is the Crafter's Workshop stencil, and using the black archival ink, my ink blender, I blended the black onto the background. And that created a beautiful effect, stenciled effect in the background. Now again, I'm using the rougher side of the shrink film, but for this one, once everything was shrunk, you could see it beautifully from both sides. So one of the sides was glossy and it showed beautifully on that side once it shrunk, and the other side was a little bit more matte. So it's hard to see how cool the design looks, but when you actually shrink it, it looks amazing. So you can basically use any stencil to create any type of design on the background. You can even probably do a resist technique with this using distressed oxide inks or some watercolors. It would probably work perfectly as well. Once the heart goes back into place, you can really see how beautiful it looks on the shiny side or on the matte side. The next medium I wanted to try was the Prima Finnabair metallic waxes. These are the shiny waxes, and I just figured, why not? Let's see what happens when I add the different colors and blend them together. You could use just one color or a few of them. So what I liked about this is that you could create an embellishment that will look a little bit shiny because these waxes have a shimmer to them. So I just added some purple and some blue and blended them all together. I will list the 3 colors that I used in this butterfly in the description area below. I find it interesting that the embellishments look more beautiful when they're shrinking or when they shrunk than how they look when they were in the big size. And this one shrunk beautifully and the butterfly looked so shimmery and pretty. The next product I wanted to try was acrylic paints, but I took the metallic acrylic paints from Prima Finnabair, which are metallic acrylic paints. I just figured that they would look really pretty on the butterfly, but I was worried that when you shrink it or melt it, the acrylic paint would not react well to it because it doesn't have shrinking properties. It just bubbles up. So I wanted to make sure I used very thin acrylic paint or liquidy acrylic paint, which these were perfect for that, as I believe that if there was a thick layer, it would not work and it would just kind of bubble up completely. Now, with this thin layer, it did bubble up when I shrunk it, but it was better than I ever expected because it created these really cool textured bubbles in the background. Since the acrylic paint has nowhere to go when the film is shrinking, it starts bubbling up, and it created this really cool texture that I actually was really impressed with. I loved it so much. So this was one of my favorites as well. Look at how cool this looks. It's like beyond amazing. And you can see it shining from both sides. For the last experiment, I really wanted to see if I could create a title with it and shrink the sentiment. So I cut out happy out of one of my die cuts and then sprayed it with some Tim Holtz gold stain. I do have to say that the film was hard to cut through these die cuts, especially because they were so intricate and small. So I don't know if a bigger word maybe would work better or something a little bit less intricate. And I found that I had to run it under the machine almost like 10 times, and I still couldn't get the little pieces in between the letters. So I just left them inside because I wanted to see how it would turn out. So you would probably have to experiment with titles a little bit more. And once I shrunk it all, it was really cool to see how even though it bunched up, it still opened up once it was done. And the word was hard like a plastic embellishment. So it was really cool to see. So I think certain dyes will work better than others. Okay, so here we go. I decided to put them all on a piece of paper just so I remember what I used for each one. It's more for my memory, but it really helps to kind of see everything. I had played originally with some of the Shrink Prink with alcohol inks, so I had made these in advance. This is the larger butterfly die cut from Holtz, and this is the tattered flowers that I did already. So all these were done with alcohol inks. I had tried it originally with my light bulb before, but I used such dark colors that I figured that for my second one, even though I used a different product, I would go with some lighter colors so you can see the effect. So I just categorized them here. And another thing I tried is that I took the piece of shrink film that I had created with these flowers, and I just shrunk it. I wanted to see what would happen. So then I was thinking, okay, this can be used for frames. So you could just cut one of the frames and shrink it, and then you could create a frame for a scrapbook page or a card. So that would be cool if you used one of the frame dies, like whether it's a circle or some kind of tattered frame, and do that as well. So it shrinks really well for bigger pieces as well. So going back to it, I'm just going to review everything. The chalk pastels. This one is the only one that took a little bit longer to kind of set, but you can always set it with some hairspray or some spray setter, so that's good as well. The outside flower, I remind you when it happened with gelatos, but you could definitely use any type of crayon. The inside one is the distress crayons. You can use Marabu crayons or the Dina Wakley ones. There's so many different, or the Prima ones. There's so many different art crayons out there, and it doesn't really matter which one you use, whatever you have available. Here I use sprays and stains, 2 different kinds, but you could use any type of spray that has some kind of fixative. My favorite, Distress Oxide, looks amazing. It looks so distressed. The watercolor one, the watercolor markers turned out beautiful because you can do shading for it. This one is also one of my favorites, is the alcohol markers. And it turned out really, really cool. Especially I love the script stamp for it. You know, the last one, which was my die cut title, which is cool. And I used the spray stain, but you could use any of these for that. One of my favorite ones with the acrylic paints, because I love all the texture that it created. The metallic acrylic paints, you could probably use regular ones as well, but the metallics are much nicer. The watercolors with my stamp, my foam stamp, and I added a little bit of the Nouveau Shimmer pen on top. Then we have the waxes, which look amazing either side. Either the matte side, it still looks shiny, or you have it more glossy on the other side. And this one, which was done with ink and a stencil, which looks amazing as well. And I'm reminding you the 2 tools that I used. It's the bone folder, the pencil bone folder, and the tweezers, the silicone tweezers. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to get notified for my next video, go ahead and press the little bell beside the subscribe button, and that will notify you every time I upload a video. So thanks so much, everyone, and please share this in social media. Share it on Facebook, Instagram, because it really helps my channel. I really appreciate you all. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.